Hi everyone, my name is Phil Willburn, Head of People Analytics and Insights at Workday. I'm so excited to be back with you all, albeit virtually, at the People Analytics and Future of Work conference. Obviously, so many things have changed since the last time we were together in San Francisco in January, but at least one thing remains the same. Data is still critical to every decision. Here at Workday, over the last 6 months, People Analytics has enabled our leaders to launch new programs during these uncertain times that cover a range of vital business and workforce needs, including employee health and well-being initiatives, return to the workplace strategy, caregiver support, location and mobility strategy and policies, reassessing our own skill strategy, and diversity and inclusion initiatives. In January, we focused on what data tells us about belonging and diversity. And we've doubled down on our efforts to support HR leaders striving to cultivate diverse and inclusive workplaces. Workday has a rich set of capabilities to help you do the same. Today, I want to share with you a recent conversation I had with Greg Pryor, my good friend and our Senior Vice President of People and Performance at Workday, on this very topic. You'll hear Greg first, diving right into our approach at Workday, and then we'll share how we're innovating in some areas with exciting new products and features. We really hope you enjoy this conversation.
You know, for decades, we have been working on improving diversity in our organizations. As you can tell from sort of my gray hair, I've been around for most of those decades doing this work. But what you'll see on the chart on the right, unfortunately, is while we've made a little bit of progress in two items there, specifically ethnic minorities, who, as a percentage of CEOs in the Fortune 500 and the S&P 500, and then the percentage of female CEOs specifically in the Fortune 500. While there's been a little bit of progress, clearly we've not achieved the objectives. And so we at Workday and many of our customers and many of the leaders in this space now are asking the question, why are our outcomes not yet meeting our intentions? We've been doing so much work, investing literally billions and billions of dollars in people's very good effort. And why is it that we're not yet achieving the outcomes? For those of you who know Phil and I, or maybe have attended some of the other parts of this session, you know that we love to geek out on some of the social research on this, social science research on this. And we wanted to share maybe just two perspectives on some of the things that we're now seeing. This is a recent Harvard Business Review article by our good friend Adam Grant, who has really looked at why is some of the diversity training maybe not delivered what we hoped, what we intended. And what we wanted to pull out here are really two key findings from this paper, and I encourage you to read it. Angela Duckworth was Adam's co-author on this, and Angela is such an incredible thought leader in this space. And they found two things, really, which we thought was important to set the table for today, that we really need to be pivoting our work and enabling our effort really on helping underrepresented talent more effectively join, stay, succeed, and lead within our organization. So much of the work has historically been on the entire organization, on maybe helping people begin to change their belief systems around appreciating diversity. But what we're now seeing is really this increased effort on the actions we can take specifically to support our underrepresented talent. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. The other key item that came out of this article is the importance of regularly collecting and reviewing data that lets you know where you are. And Phil is just extraordinary. Phil and his amazing team are extraordinary at this. And we're going to show you specifically what that looks like so that you can really see, are you making progress? We won't spend too much time on this, but we didn't want to just have a one-hit wonder on the on that particular study from Angela and Adam. But additionally, just a few weeks ago, there was a really fascinating report from the National Health Services in the UK. And again, what they found, and we really believe this is a trend, which is why we picked these two items up, is that in order to achieve these objectives that you're trying to achieve, you have to be focused on the talent management capabilities. And very consistently, what they found was that you need to be a more deliberate approach, specifically for underrepresented minorities and women, and look at how we identify, assess, develop, and deploy individuals with the capacity and the capability to make a difference at the most senior levels. And we're going to sort of just share this broad perspective to highlight some of the shift that's happening to really overcome two of the barriers that we believe we've seen, that our Chief Diversity Officer, our good friend Karen Taylor, continues to help us understand and talk about. And there are really two things that we see as barriers at this point. One is that diverse representation without inclusion, belonging, and equity, and we'll talk more about this, what we call our VIBE strategy. How do we value inclusion, belonging, and equity? That unless you've created a place where people feel that they can belong, where they are included and there are equitable processes, it will continue to basically be a leaky bucket. And so we'll talk directly about that. And the second, which we'll geek out in a moment, my good friend Phil introduced me a number of years ago to this idea of goal setting versus goal getting. And we want to take a couple of moments and talk about how we can overcome these barriers and some of the work that we're doing in this space. So let me just introduce very quickly what we at Workday call our VIBE strategy. As I mentioned, having diverse representation is critical and the appropriate start. But what we need to do to help that population, to help all folks belong, we need to vibe. We need to value inclusion, belonging, and equity. And then the second thing we believe we need to do is really move from purely goal setting, which is necessary but not sufficient, to this idea of goal getting. And Phil, you introduced me to this topic based on some really fascinating work that you had the opportunity to do at a previous employer. Can you talk a little bit about what does this mean? What has this meant for you?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And this was actually passed along to me. A number of years ago, I was able to do some great work with the U.S. Olympic Committee and the training center there in Colorado Springs. And I just knowing a number of coaches who coach elite athletes, and the biggest challenge they were facing is that these athletes who are trying to go to the Olympics or train for Olympics, they have 4 years to train, to shave like milliseconds, so forth, off their training. And one of the lessons that was passed to me from a coach of a Paralympic athlete was the difference between setting a goal 4 years out and then waking up every day and goal getting, which is having a plan every single day. They monitor everything they eat, every exercise they have, how many hours they sleep. They really go get every single day. And I honestly think that's been the differences in the lack of progress we have is we set these ambitious goals, but we don't get after it every day. And we don't have I would say, a system of accountable analytics that helps us get after that every single day.
Well, and that has been an incredible gift for me. I mean, you sharing that idea, it's something I aspire to practice and something we're going to talk about more about today. And how do you create that? And so we've sort of taken this idea in our frame for the next 45 or so minutes that we have is to think about the VIBE strategy. You need an intentional strategy. You need to know what you're doing. And at Workday, we describe that as VIBE, which is how we value inclusion, belonging, and equity. And then, Phil, you need this virtuous cycle. You need this goal-getting system, if you will. You need what I think about as a series of accountable analytics that help us really be specific and intentional about the outcomes. And we are very excited to share as a company what we call the Workday Vibe Index. And that's a way to really understand where are you doing, how are you doing, what are the opportunities for improvement, and how you get really specific. The next really is about the Vibe Central, and we'll talk more about that. I'll let you introduce that properly, Phil. And then Phil and I together are going to really talk about, as partners in this work historically, how do we take those gaps in areas for improvement? How do we deep dive into the indicators, which Phil and his team does brilliantly? And then how does everyone come together to actually use Workday functionality, those actions, to intentionally start to change those outcomes? And we're going to share what that looks like in really practical perspective. But it has to start with the individual at the center. It has to start with knowing the context and meeting people and your organization where you are. And Phil, could I ask you to talk a little bit about how we understand our workmates and how other organizations are thinking about understanding their people?
Yeah, I think this is at the basis, really at the crux of this strategy around Vibe, is to understand your people. And there are traditional ways of looking at it, and then there are kind of new ways that accelerate our vibe strategy, at least here at Workday. And why don't I start with maybe kind of the traditional way that we look at understanding our people is we tend to look at it, and being an analytics professional, I'm guilty and I do this all the time. We tend to group employees all together. The average years to promotion is 2.3 years. The average sense of belonging is 80%. And over the last 6 or 12 months, the average attrition is 6%. And that's all well and good, but it's not great for driving insights around specific populations that have lived experiences that you really need to understand deeply so that they can vibe at whatever company or at Workday, and so that you can keep them in the talent system, you can grow them, retain them, and they can take leadership roles. And that comes, largely, and by the way, doing this is the traditional way. The biggest problem is it distorts and misleads the conclusion on subpopulations. So enter this idea of intersectionality. So this is it's an idea that's been around 30 years, but I think Josh Bersin wrote a really nice article on it just recently about the need for diversity and inclusion programs to really get a sense of intersectionality. And this is the idea that different demographics just by themselves do not capture the lived experience of your population or your employees. That only by intersecting, very simply maybe, gender and race, Asian or Asian female, and or intersecting other things like generation and or job profile, do you really start to understand and impact and then create strategies and actions to support that population as you go through your talent life cycle. Now, there are all sorts of intersectionalities. I mean, I think Workday is fantastic because it gives you tons and tons of definitions and dimensions in which you can intersect your populations. And really, for what we use at Workday internally in our tenant may not be applicable for everybody. So you can really discover what your intersectionality is for your particular company. I think Barbary, she had just told me that some of our largest customers have 60 or 70 gender identity fields. There's a lot of intersectionality to look at that. Now, when we start to incorporate this idea of intersectionality, Greg, it really helps us unpack our understanding our employees at just a whole new level. So let's just take a quick example. So take, if you can measure this, which is not too straightforward, we'll talk about that, a sense of belonging from all your employees. You can say, on average, it's 80%. It's pretty good. I think we're good. We don't need to do anything with belonging. But when you start to intersect key dimensions, you start to realize that there are different lived experiences that you need to look at it from there. So, white male, white female, much higher sense of belonging. URM, male, female, okay, not great. But then you see, kind of the red sticking out there. The male Asian perspective is much lower sense of belonging. So, lower sense of belonging leads to attrition, leads to them looking for external jobs, so forth like that. Only when you bring in this kind of view of intersectionality do you start to see patterns. I've seen it myself there. And so this is really, really critical and your strategy, and also been really critical for us in our vibe work here.
And I know, Phil, I know you and your team have been working on this, and I know in a moment we're going to share sort of the origin story from our great workmate and friend, Karen Taylor, challenging you on do you vibe and how do we make that happen, Phil? But, I have to speak for myself as a practitioner. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I had a very classic way, as Phil had described, in thinking about this. And I almost referred to the moment where you started to share that intersectionality and share those results as a personal stupiphany. On one hand, it was immediately obvious, and on the other hand, it was a complete surprise. And the ability to look and to see that people's experience wasn't the same was incredibly eye-opening for me, was such a motivation to say, gosh, this can't be the case. We have to do better than this. We have to create minimally a consistent experience. We obviously want a remarkable experience for all of our folks, but we cannot not create at least a consistent experience. And so I know that's where you've really been working, with product and with the team to take that and really talk about that in the context of the Vibe Index and other components. But can you maybe take us to the origin story? How did we get on this road?
Yeah. It's been a journey for sure. I want to mention one thing. Intersectionality has been around for a while, 30 years. There's tons of research teams and organizations that have looked at this, right? The difference is how easy it is, and in real time can you look at the intersectionality. Tons of teams can take months and months to do research and look at this, but with the right setup, you can actually look at this more or less in real time, and that's the differentiator. That's the kind of accountable analytics. So, Greg, you asked about the origin story. It's great, and I'm kind of happy Karen's not on because she would remember this and push me even further here. So, a little bit about the context. Karen came in about 2.5 years ago, a little over 2.5 years ago, and she really came in with the vision for Vibe, and that's around looking at inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. And being an analytics leader, I go, wow, that's great. I'm totally behind this, but I'm like, how do we measure this? Like, how do we practically put this in place so that we are vibing at Workday? That's what I was obsessed with. And essentially I asked her in a meeting, what do we do? Just ask every single employee if they belong here, that they're psychologically safe and they trust us? And she goes, yeah, Phil, do it. And I was like, okay. So that was one of the things is we went off, we did it. That's part of our Feedback Friday story. You'll talk about our pulse surveys, Greg, here as part of this presentation in the future. And we went back, we got it. We're so excited. We sit down with Karen, we say, on average, belonging is X%, like pretty positive. Everybody feels like they belong. We're good. She goes, Phil, no, you gotta lean into it. You gotta unpack it. What about this intersection, this gender, this ethnicity? What about this people with disabilities? What about veterans, so forth like that? And I'm like, oh my goodness, great questions. And when we started to unpack, when we started to look at intersectionality in true earnest, we saw patterns that we never saw existed before. Yeah. And I remember a time she took these insights up to our executive team, and I remember hearing feedback that was the first valuable insight they got from us, which is, okay, I have something to work on too, but that's fantastic that I actually identified an area where we needed to go. And then Ashley, our chief people officer, and Karen came back to us, to our team. One of my amazing colleagues, Kaval Safdar, she put together this first early prototype. She was brilliant. And they said, how do we scale this at Workday so every leader knows where they stand and they know what actions they can take? And it was a big learning lesson for me, right? We really need to measure Vibe. We really need to look at intersectionality, and everybody needs this data so they can take action. It was just like, all right, got it. Now I'm behind you, Karen. So
Phil, take us to the detail, if you will, to show how these components come together. Because obviously I'm a buyer as well. It was so enlightening for me when we started to look at this, and across so many dimensions. The extensibility of what you're about to talk about is just so powerful to allow us to know where we can celebrate and where we can go improve. And so, we all don't need to boil the ocean on these things. We know exactly, very specifically, where we need to focus our attention on.
Yeah, and exactly. So the Vibe Index now is, as part of a product that we have here at Workday, it includes broadly three things. The first is around breadth and depth. So we talk about, from your research, Greg, that you cited, they talked about how important it is to look at the talent across the employee in the talent life cycle. So hiring, promotions, leadership, retention, all of that, this index covers all of those key things. The second one, which we discussed, is intersectionality. We stop grouping our populations together, look at the unique lived experiences, look at the impact on these certain processes, these talent processes on those populations. And lastly, it provides what I think is the most consumable part, is a heat map. It basically shows you where your biggest opportunities is in the life cycle and which groups you need to focus on in order to make improvements along inclusion, belonging, and equity. So, Greg, I'm supposed to ask you or ask me if you want a deeper look, so I can give you a deeper look here.
Bill, can you give us a deeper look? You were on a roll. I didn't want to stop you. I was afraid to become a speed bump in the Phil train. Take us into the detail.
I just didn't want to interrupt you like I always do, Greg. So nothing.
You are too kind, my friend.
Yeah. So let's unpack this Vibe Index a little bit. So on the left-hand side, on the vertical axis, you get to see the kind of the breadth and depth of the talent employee life cycle across hires, promotions, leadership, attrition, and overall representation. Super important to understand those areas. And then across the top, you get to put in your intersectionalities. So for this example, we put on the intersectionality of gender and U.S. ethnicity. So female Asian, female URM, et cetera. And then you start to, after you have the talent life cycle and those intersections or the groups you want to focus on, you bring in the heat map, right? And so that heat map really shows you the area of greatest opportunity. It shows you the areas where the least amount of parity is happening in those groups across those processes. And in this particular visual, the red and orange scale shows you areas where it has the least amount of parity, and the green and blue show you a little bit more positive there. So I know it's a lot to kind of see visually. I'm just going to unpack this a little bit more. So I'm going to show you both group scores and outcome scores. So as part of the Vibe Index, the intersections you look like get a total score on a scale of 0 to 5. And it tells you kind of, which groups are having the most parity in the process and which group needs a little bit more focus. And then the outcome scores, again, on the same scale, gives you the perspective of what areas in the talent and employee life cycle that you need to focus your systems, do some additional work in order to make them more at the more parity. And lastly, you get an overall Vibe Index, which is connected to a maturity model. It's super cool, all the stuff that Karen team has been putting together. And that Vibe Index score helps you kind of unpack where you stand overall based on the parity of that organization. And I'm just going to dig into a couple of examples to explain this maybe more granularly than I already have here. So let's go down and look at this particular one about female Asian. So how you read this and how you start to look at this is the overall representation in this fictional organization of female Asians, about 11.6% here. And then we take a look on those processes of the hires, that first line right there, of the hires that have happened in the last 12 months, what total percent have been female Asian? You can see it's slightly higher than their population. So it's slightly above par or above parity for what their representation shows there. Promotions, of all the promotions that have happened in the last 12 months, slightly higher, 12.4%. Then you start to see some gaps, right? So when we start to look at leadership, right, you see the red there, it's 5.5%. So of all of the people in leadership roles in this company, only 5.5% are Asian female. And then you start to see that's where the parity gap is. And you can see also, if you look further, there's more attrition happening. So even though the hiring is improving, there's more attrition happening. So that's an area that you may need to investigate in. We'll look at one more example just to show you how it compares at intersectionality. Here, starting up at the top at male URM and the representation of 7%, they represent 7% of this entire company. It could be an organization, it could be a function, it could be a department. It's really scalable in that perspective. And then you look at, hey, we're hiring below. Of the total hires, we're hiring below 6.7, which is below our representation of male URM. We're promoting them below their overall representation. They're definitely not represented in leadership at 4.8% compared to the total population. The good thing is the sense of belonging, overall slightly higher than representation, and then the attrition. So this would be an example where you would specifically say, hey, of the groups of our intersectionalities that we really need to address, there's something going on here. What part of the process and what part of this group can we start to tackle? And then lastly, not only can you look at the groups and the intersections there, Greg, you can actually look at the areas where, you're the weakest on the outcomes. So in this particular example, we're highlighting leadership because you can see that, basically 4 of the 6 groups, these are the underrepresented groups, are substantially underrepresented in leadership roles, and that, white female and white male are overrepresented in those roles. So they get a low score in that overall outcome. This can help set targets specifically around kind of where you want to take action. And highlighting the vibe score, right? This is a summarized. So if you're like, Phil, this heat map is driving me crazy. I don't love it. I love it. I'm a data person. That's okay. But like, there's the vibe score. You can see where you stand. And I know it's a bit technical, but I want to summarize it in this way, Greg. I was just recently asked by CHRO. She said, Phil, how do you know? All I want to know is where the worst offenders are, so I can get our strategy on track. And by implementing the Vibe Index and looking at this heat map, you can absolutely know which organizations in which places are not having equitable experiences, and you can take action directly from that perspective. Is that
Phil, thanks for
understandable? Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes sense to me, but you've schooled me on this in quite a while. Maybe just a couple of things, and then I want to talk about how we convert that and think about that, and then the indicators. You find a gap, and what are you going to then do about it? Maybe just 2 things. One, I would say to your point, the extensibility. The fact that we happen to look at 6 indicators or 6 points of intersectionality there around ethnic background and gender. But imagine you look at this by geography, you look at it by generation, to really say, how are we doing in these different populations, or is there this equity, or where do we need to focus by level? But because, and obviously full disclosure, Workday geek on all this, because you've got that data not only in Workday, but then you've got all of the underlying, let's call it transaction data or insight data, you're able, to your point, to so quickly and really almost in real time be able to pull this together. So you've identified a gap, Phil. For example, in the example you just used, that underrepresented males at the organization is a place we want to go focus. How do you then double click into the indicators? How do you look and get under those numbers and see where you want to take action?
Yeah, I think there are 2 parts of the analytic journey. I think there's really 3 parts. I really think actions are the output of great analytics. So, but again, I'm totally biased, and I will state my bias on that. So Vibe Index is really where you need to focus on. Where's the greatest opportunity for you? You need to know how you're going to make progress to impact the outcomes. That's what the indicators provide. And I love that we've been able to quickly and deliberately, intentionally put together a whole set of indicators in Vibe Central. I would say it's not exhaustive. I would say it's based on kind of some great research. But here's where you're going to find, let's say, hires is your issue. But where in the hiring process is there a problem? Is it that you're not getting enough candidates, diverse candidates? Is it that the funnel in which we're going through, they're falling off at some particular stage? Where is that? That's where you need to really deep dive and look at the indicators. The indicator will show you the progress that you're making. And Vibe Central shows you all sorts of stuff: hires by race and gender, promotion rates by race and gender, comp ratio, looks at succession plans. There are a lot of great indicators. And really what I would say is the Vibe Index is universal, extensible, and can be used everywhere. The indicators will really matter on the type of organization you are and the type of the research that you do. So it's a great source. And I think for me, the indicators unlock the potential of the actions to drive the broader strategy, which I think is, we want to get into how do you actually take actions from this and show some examples, right?
Yeah, no, and I think taking that, to your point, taking that with the other analytics that are available, using your analytics team to really understand this data and be able to provide it. So let's actually do that. Let's not leave people hanging. Let's actually jump out to the action. So I've identified a gap. I've pulled through some of those indicators that are important for my organization. And then how do we use Workday functionality? Full disclosure, this is where I get most excited about the creative application of our functionality. So we wanted to take the 5 outcomes and talk about how we take action. We're only going to have time today, although if anyone wants to call us up, we'd be happy to go on for hours and talk about examples for all 5. But Barbary told us we had a limited time, and so we're only covering 3 today. But what we really wanted to do was help show that how you think about that from I've got a set of outcomes, what might be the indicators you look at organizationally, and then where is their Workday functionality? Our good friend Leanne Levensaler, when I first joined Workday, talked about Workday as a series of Lego blocks. You could take those and construct those to deliver what's important for you. And I really think that still remains true. You've got this toolbox of functionality that you can creatively and thoughtfully deck up against improving an indicator. So in this case, Phil, we shared some examples here to make it super practical. To your point, you might look at the hiring process and say, how can I improve that with Workday functionality and Workday actions? How do I look at the conversion ratio of people moving perhaps from screening into the interview process? Or how do I look at onboarding effectiveness? And for each organization, they'll probably have different indicators. They'll probably have different sets of actions. But decking these actions, these functions, is really important. So let's get super practical. Let's not stay at the theoretical, which you and I love, but let's talk about one example. Maybe you could share with people, what did it look like, or what could it look like if you were to take conversion ratio and see that there was opportunity for you in that space?
Yeah, I think any of those, any and all of us who are looking at hiring, one of the most important things is to really understand the progression of your talent. And it's the research that we did here at Workday internally to find something which was really helpful in looking at our hiring and hiring diverse candidates. And that's exploring conversion ratios through like a diversity funnel or a diversity pipeline. So here's just an example of what one would look like. So in this particular case, we have kind of Asian applicants for this particular job profile that people are applying, white, URM. In a parity view of the funnel would to say that when people come in, we have, this is new, screen, interview, offer accepted. That's kind of the funnel. When people come in as a total proportion of job profile that you're hiring for, total proportion of people you're recruiting for a specific organization, they make up a certain percentage. So in this particular case, we see that Asian males are Asians are making up close to 60% of the total applicant pool there. But how do they perform as they go through? Because that's what you need to diagnose. You can say when they go to screen, they're about slightly less percent, but then you start to see a drop off at the interview, and specifically the interview and then offer stage there. So this allows you to point, hey, hiring is really important. We saw that from the Vibe Index. Our indicator is there is an issue with conversion ratios from the screen to interview process. Where can we now take specific actions in that one area to improve our overall diverse hires? And I think getting that granular actually helps you in that specific process. And I know there's some great actions we've taken here, and I know, Greg, you're going to highlight a couple of actions that you can take in Workday to help with those conversion ratios.
And I think your point, thinking through what I would call sort of the glide path. I've identified that gap. I've looked at a series of indicators. I've pulled, the layers of onions back, and I've discovered, hey, here's a particular topic. Then where the rubber meets the road, where you start to get into goal getting versus just goal setting, which is necessary but not sufficient, is really thinking about those, and I think it's a creative application of those Lego blocks that you have in your Workday tool set. So one example of that, in looking at the conversion ratio, maybe candidate masking, great new functionality made available by our product team, to say maybe the underlying issue, or at least I can have a hypothesis that it's people are being affected by unconscious bias, which is a thing, and so maybe applying candidate masking helps to improve that. We've talked about this idea of monitoring and nudging. You and I are perhaps too big of fans. I'll speak for myself. I'm too big a fan of behavioral nudging. I think there's a lot of opportunity. You have this telemetry, but imagine now we have this insight that the analytics team has discovered, and we can actually put it using Workday's people experience technology into a card, into an announcement. Maybe there's a journey we create for a hiring manager to say, looks like you've opened up a rec. Here's a quick reminder of the key insights we have and key actions we're taking to enable us to do a great job, and let people know at this point in the process, having an inclusive mindset is going to be important. And then maybe finally looking at pointing specifically at the specific action that one can take, a particular report. We don't have time to get into it today, but as you know, Phil, I am a huge believer that using skills and the democratization of skills will help us shift from who we know to what we know. And I am very heartened. I'm very excited about that possibility. But those are 3 examples of a whole list of things. Again, I think we're only limited by our creativity. We want to do 2 other examples before we take questions today so that we're being really practical and specific. The second was around promotion. You and I have talked for a long time. Some of those indicators of promotion could be contribution, and you've got Workday functionality like progress check-ins, like skill-based recommendations that are helping people understand how do I progress, or requesting feedback. One of the most important and powerful strategies to help people have a sense of belonging is for them to be getting feedback and to enable their support. I know one of your favorite indicators is promotion velocity. I think it's primarily because you like saying promotion velocity. I do as well. But looking at that and things like succession planning, talent marketplace, which is an exciting new capability in Workday, or sponsorships and mentors, helping people get the support that they need. And then we're going to geek out for a moment on what I call calibration efficacy. And for those people who use Workday's calibration feature or use a calibration feature, what does that look like? And so, Phil, could you talk a little bit about, in some of your experience talking with our customers, how have they sort of thought about this in different ways and improved their diverse pipeline?
Yeah, I think one of the important things around promotions is succession planning at leadership levels. And one of the great tools that we have is around assessments and leadership capabilities assessments. When you start to apply a vibe lens and the intersectionality lens to these type of assessments that we take, you actually get to see the hidden patterns, right? Mm-hmm. And so, with hundreds, the challenge is with hundreds of people or even thousands of people doing succession, how do you ensure that diverse talent are not getting stuck by kind of homophily or people's bias? They don't creep in that process. In this case, if you can compare, and some of the insights we found here at Workday, when you look at promotion readiness in these, what I would call, boundaries of succession planning, whether they're ready in 1 year or ready now or ready in 2 to 3 years, are those real boundaries? Are they boundaries that are holding people up? And in our case, we found that when we start to look broader of readiness, by the way, there is no difference whether or not they're ready for promotion if they're ready in 1 year or they're ready now. They're ready for promotion from the leadership assessment, but that more diverse populations often live in the not quite ready in 1 year or 2, 3 years because of the way the process that people are going. And so structurally what you need to do is, and what we've done here, is remove the applicable the process to make it biased, and really say we have near-term successors and long-term successors, and that creates a much more diverse pool of candidates. And it's just a great example about how to systematically look at the data and try to remove any bias that may creep into the systems that people are using.
Yeah, I think, Phil, as you said, it's not that there's any, that this may be true for any one organization, but this is just the level of rigor. This is the level of detail. I couldn't agree more. thinking about how do I put the vibe lens on this? Is there an opportunity where, and we probably don't have time to talk about too much on homophily, but that sort of social science issue affecting us, but you all and your team continues to look at that level. Obviously, some great technology available to take action on that, learning journeys and being able to help people grow their capabilities. Workday's new Career Hub. I think Barbara put up our safe harbor statement. Exciting for those folks of us who are early adopters on that product. How we look at that, making machine learning-based recommendations to really enable everyone's success. How we look at the leadership assessments, and maybe just a second. One of the things that I'll say, I took the easy path for so many years by suggesting that people leave their calibration findings in calibration year over year to make it easier for people the following year to just calibrate folks. And I know one of the things you taught me and I really appreciated from our data is that one way to address or put that vibe lens on it is to actually ask people to restart from a calibration perspective. Don't let the historic bias continue to come through. Ask people to stop, provide some training up front, talk about that at that moment, and help people understand that. And that was a great insight of where we're taking these actions and maybe suggesting them in the context of some of these processes.
For time's sake, we're going to end things there for today. But Greg and I go on to discuss a lot of great examples on how you can take actions right in Workday to help you create more inclusive workplaces. And if you want to learn more about the powerful analytics we have, please visit our website or check out our virtual booth for a demo. And look, I'm a practitioner at Workday. My job is to try to help Workday scale with people analytics, but I also work for them. So here's my 15-second pitch for you. Workday gives you a broad set of solutions ranging from core HCM reporting and dashboards to Prism Analytics for layering in external data to Workday Adaptive Planning for effectively managing your workforce planning efforts. Please visit our booth to learn more about how we can help you make better decisions plans powered by Workday. And thank you so much for joining me today, and have a great People Analytics Future of Work conference.
Hey, Phil, that was impressive. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Man, that was really, really good. You and Greg are quite a show. I'm going to have to come back and revisit that too. Hey, I got some questions for you right off the bat. And one is kind of one you may not be expecting, but it's really a compliment, is if you've heard me present before, I've talked about the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. And it's a Chinese proverb that I cite. And I was really taken aback by the language that was being used, everything from vibe to intentionality. And I think I got a new word in my lexicon now, stupiphany. Is that what I heard in there? So can you just talk to that real quick? I mean, did you guide that? Did that happen organically? Or did you say, hey, we got to get on the same page and really nail down our language here? How did that evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the language was very strategic. And believe it or not, that took a large chunk of our time. And I give credit to Karen Taylor and Greg Pryor and our Ashley Goldsmith, our chief people officer. They really helped from like an analytics perspective. We want to look at the numbers. Like, here's the numbers I want to do. Here's what I want to get across. They're like, what do they mean? How do we translate this? How do we ensure that every employee at Workday feels like they belong, feel they're included, and feels like this is an equitable place to work? And so we started with an idea, and then the language evolved with lots of different people on it. But as you know, Al, language is so important. And as people understand the perceptions of the organization, the language you use to understand diversity, belonging, and inclusion is just as important, and is a reflection of many of the actions that you take. So that's kind of how we got there.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly celebrate it because so many, to your point, take what I would call either a data-centric approach or a technology-centric approach, and they don't really focus on the purpose, who the audience is, what language they use, then work backwards. And it sounds like that's what happened. There was kind of a meeting on the two ends, and you adopted the language of the internal customer, namely the leaders within HR, and then accommodated your work to meet that. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that really is. We we thought we were onto something. We said, "Hey, how does this look?" And then, like I said in the story, Karen's like, "This is great, but what does this intersection look like? What do we need to understand here?" We really got push. I wouldn't say pushback, but almost like strong collaboration with the business partners. And I think with your business leaders and your leadership supporting and integrating the ideas of analytics in the organization, that's how you get mass adoption. And frankly, we've been working on this idea for 2 years. I saw that Stacia had mentioned, "Hey, how long has this been around?" It's been evolving for a couple of years. And we are just, because we were very intentional about the language and what this means, and we've tested it out, the adoption in the pool has been amazing inside the business. And now that Workday has essentially made this a product, it's been amazing. The number of customers who reached out and said, "Thank you so much for giving us, this idea of what we need to be looking at and starting to provide this solution." So we are just, honestly surprised. And it goes back to it wasn't a great analytics. It wasn't just analytics. It was the whole organization coming together to say, how do we solve this business challenge?
Mm-hmm. So, and with you there at Workday, obviously you have the technology at your fingertips. You get to influence the product roadmap. So with that being said, there are a lot of people analytics practitioners, and we've talked about in previous segments already, that part of our job now is to become educated shoppers, educated consumers of these technologies, because no longer are we as analysts just going to throw everything into a spreadsheet and use SAS or SPSS to do the analysis. We're creating sustainable, scalable solutions, of which obviously Workday is one. So my question for you is that Workday does so much, and analytics might get lost in the fray. So of those who are saying, "Oh, I didn't know, Workday, did that or could do that," how can they best educate themselves? I know there's a bit of irony given that we're at a conference and this is kind of the purpose to educate themselves. But if there's a business problem to solve or an approach to take, what would you offer up as an idea? Hey, do this just to get started.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges, Al, is that the maturity of people analytics and the transformation of these teams need to continue to evolve. And I think the biggest gap is that traditionally, and even today, I talk to so many of my peers, they treat this as pulling the data in, you have some supermodel and it produces the insights out. And that's really not how the business wants the data. I think as an analytics leader, you need to think like a product manager. You need to say, Vibe for us is one product inside Workday that we manage, we curate and distill and have some product management, some insights and so forth out there. But that's one product. We also do workforce analytics, which is a dashboard of combination of scorecard and dashboard metrics. We also have the Best Workday survey, which is our feedback Friday pulse surveys. And we're thinking like product managers. And if you're a buying or understanding a technology in the perspective, if you as a people analytics practitioner, manager, or leader, you need to say, how does this fit into the persona-based strategy that I'm trying to do and the products that I currently own? And the products in my side is not like the vendors that you own, but is the analytic products that you produce to the business. And I agree, like it's great that in some ways, being at Workday, being practitioner is fantastic. All the data is connected. It's all aligned. We're on the same page, one source of truth. And then we can really focus on what are the products that we produce from it. Sometimes it's Workday, sometimes we use some other stuff to distribute those insights to there. And when you're focused on the product that you're consumer, your HR partner or your business leader consumes, then the buying, the understanding, it gets a lot simpler because you're focused on what you're doing from a product management perspective. So I think that's just a different shift that people analytics teams really have to uptick and transition to in order to get the scale and the value that the organization is investing them into.
Yeah, let me just give you some, virtual elbow daps on that, because I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a healthy mindset for us to have. And I don't think it's, many come into the discipline from a research orientation, whether it be IO psychology or economics or statistics or something of that nature. And similarly, the technologists come in with a product orientation, but they might not have the research and organizational change dynamics, individual team behavior, so forth. So we have time for maybe one more question. And I want to say this, or ask this. We're a product manager. You want me to mumble that again? Product manager. And there's so many things that we can do. How do we prioritize? How do you prioritize?
Yeah. Yes, there are so many things you can do. I agree, Al. And I agree. It's also hard to say product manager a million times in a row. I think the way that you prioritize really is you have to have at least, well, let me talk about what we do here instead of about what applies to everywhere else. We've mapped out a 2-year persona-based strategy where we deeply understand the personas that we're trying to serve, the business challenges they're doing, and the insights they need in order to make the decisions with that people data. We deeply understand their persona, and then we curate and create products that fulfill that persona's need. And we started with the top. We started with our VP and SVP. Actually, our first persona was our manager. And then we went to SVP. And then we're now on our kind of support personas. It's our TA partner, our belonging diversity partner, our HR partner. And that persona allows us to prioritize the right solution, because until you can understand the persona you're creating a product for, it's really, really difficult to decide what to buy, what to invest, where to put in there. I think analytics teams should have a very specific strategy. They shouldn't just rely on the strategy of the business, because oftentimes they're operating 6 to 12 months ahead of when the personas need the insights. So that's how we've done it here. It may not be the solution for everybody, but since we are very product oriented, we think about personas. The personas help us prioritize. We curate the products from that perspective, and that's what's allowed us to gain adoption and traction as a part of it.
Again, I celebrate it so much. Knowing your audience, tailoring your solutions to that audience. There are basic product management principles. However, they have not been applied in this discipline very long at all, and they're certainly not pervasive. So I certainly celebrate that. And if I'm going to forecast, frankly, I believe that's going to be more the norm and or leading practice as we move forward. So as we wrap, any final comments and how can viewers, listeners engage with you personally and Workday in general?
Yeah, I think, visit our virtual booth. Cool idea. Great. I was in there, I was checking out the virtual booth. That was just fun, right? And people are online waiting to demo and show stuff for you. So I think it's, this is a great virtual conference. I've really enjoyed it so far. I was really struck this morning by what Stacia and Priyanka presented, especially Stacia. She really nailed it when she says, there's been essentially a dearth of really great belonging, diversity, equity solutions in the market, or even people thinking about it deeply. Beyond representation's important, but if you have if you're not doing well on belonging, you have the kind of churn in the organization. I think as a community and as products, we really need to double down on that to solve some of the issues that we're facing. So I was struck by that already. And I just, again, appreciate the great community. I will be responding on chat. Visit our booth, reach out, email me, happy to respond, and just really, really enjoying the conference. You guys have done a great job putting it together. So appreciate it, Al.
Hey, it means a lot, that Phil, and you're doing awesome work, man. I'm a huge fan. So you keep it up as well, and hope to see you in person before too long. I make those daps happen in real life. So yeah, you be well and keep it up. See ya.
All right. Take care.